G'day, this is Music is Medicine. My name's Matt Creedon. Today I'd like to tell you a story. It's about a little child. Maybe you've met them. Maybe you see them every morning in the mirror. Maybe they're still quietly living inside you. When that child was born, they didn't know anything about music. They didn't know anything about success, or failure, or talent, or embarrassment. They didn't know which notes were supposed to sound beautiful or which people were supposed to matter more than others. Everything was simply new. Every sound was interesting. Every face was interesting. Every experience was met with curiosity. A bird wasn't beautiful. A truck wasn't noisy. A piano wasn't difficult. It was simply what it was. A child listened before they had learned how to judge. Then something began to happen. Little by little, the grown-ups arrived. They didn't mean any harm. They were simply passing on what they had learned. Like, that's right, that's wrong. You're clever, be careful. Don't make mistakes. You need more practice. Some people are naturally talented, and music is difficult. And without anybody intending it, the child slowly stopped listening and began believing. That might be the moment we all quietly forgot something important. Imagine that same child walking into their first music lesson. The teacher smiles and says, "Let's try that one more time." The child hears, "Wonderful, I'm learning." Another child hears, "I'm not good enough." The teacher never changed. The sentence never changed. Only the story changed. Isn't that interesting? The sound stayed exactly the same. The meaning came afterwards. I found how much of life works like that. Someone forgets to reply to your message. Did they reject us? Or are they simply busy? Someone walks past without saying hello. Do they dislike us? Or were they thinking about something else? Someone gives us advice. Is it criticism or kindness? Perhaps life isn't speaking nearly as loudly as we imagine. Perhaps we're mostly listening to the stories we've learned to place over the sounds. The strange thing about stories is that they begin looking like evidence. If I believe people don't like me, I'll start noticing every tiny sign that seems to prove it. If I believe I'm hopeless at music, every mistake becomes more evidence. The story quietly starts building its own case, not because it's true, because it's familiar. And then something even stranger happens. We begin defending ourselves against stories that never actually happened. Someone says one sentence, we prepare 10 replies. Someone gives us one suggestion, we hear an attack. Before long, our whole life becomes one long conversation with imaginary enemies. But here's what music taught me. Noise has never healed noise. If someone bangs on the piano, banging harder doesn't create harmony. Somebody has to start listening. I've noticed something over the years. The students who improve the fastest aren't the ones who make the fewest mistakes. They're the ones who aren't frightened of them. They'll laugh, play the wrong note, try again, experiment. They're still playing the way children play. The students who struggle usually aren't fighting the music, they're fighting themselves. I remember believing that music theory was incredibly complicated. There were sharps, flats, key signatures, hundreds of chords, thousands of note names. It felt like I was trying to memorize 12 different languages. Then one day I stopped looking at the labels and I started listening to the relationships. That's what eventually became the easy key. I realized something beautiful. The note C isn't special. Neither is G, neither is F sharp. Their names change, their relationships don't. Every key contains exactly the same emotional landscape. One always feels like home. Another feels strong, another feels playful, another longs to resolve. Suddenly, music stopped being 12 different systems and it became one conversation, spoken with 12 different accents. And then something unexpected happened. I started seeing people differently. Perhaps we're a little like musical keys. Different names, different cultures, different histories, different appearances, different voices. Yet underneath, we all seem to be looking for remarkably similar things. To love, to be loved, to belong, to feel safe, to create something meaningful before our time is over. Maybe we're far more alike than we've been taught. I sometimes imagine an alien arriving on Earth. They would ask, "How do I talk to humans?" One person says, "Well, you'll have to learn every language." Another smiles and says, "Or learn one language well and let someone else translate." That's what the Easy Key does. It teaches relationships. Relationships translate. Labels divide. Relationships unite. So perhaps music has been quietly teaching us something much bigger than music. Maybe every melody is reminding us that the relationship matters more than the labels. Maybe every chord is showing us that tension isn't the enemy. It's simply waiting to resolve. Maybe every key is reminding us that different doesn't mean difficult, only unfamiliar. So I'd like to leave you with this one question. When you were little, before you learned all the stories, before you learned who was important, before you learned what success looked like, before you learned which notes were supposed to be difficult, who were you listening as? Because I don't think that child has disappeared. I think they simply became very quiet beneath all the thinking. Maybe healing isn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it's remembering someone very old. The child who listened before every sound needed a story. The child who could still hear wonder. The child who wasn't trying to become extraordinary, because they already were. Every time you pick up an instrument, every time you hear the wind, every time someone speaks your name, life quietly asks the same question. Would you like to listen again? And perhaps that's why music is medicine.